Read Into It with Robin, a virtual book club.
And welcome to the virtual book club. Today we're going to be discussing emotional inheritance. And what's really nice is that we are going to be discussing it with the author herself, Dr. Galit Alice. So we'll just be inviting her on. I don't know why I'm having some trouble with that. Okay. Let me try. Okay. Oh, there we go. We have a view request. Okay. Hi, Victoria. Hi, everyone who's here. Okay.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
So glad that you're here with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's such an honor to have the author herself on here with us. I was just saying, I wanted to say a couple of confessions. So
Yes.
I really love to read, but there are some therapeutic themed books that are just a little dry, heavy, technical, boring, and that was absolutely not the case with this book.
Thank
It
you.
flowed, it was interesting. I mean, interesting is an understatement. I found it like fascinating. And it's an easy read. It's just not one of those heavy books. And I'm saying that as somebody who many of my books, because I read so much, I take them out of the library. Otherwise, I would have like 5,000 books. And this one I purchased. I purchased it a couple years ago already because some books, like you take them out again and again, and it's just like, I have to own this one. So this book made it onto my shelf. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really glad to be here today and really talk about the book and talk to you and meet you. So thank you
Yeah.
for inviting me.
Yeah. So I want to read like parts of the book and get into it. But even before we start that, I want to get a little bit of history. Just if you can tell us a little bit about like how did you discover the idea of emotional inheritance? What led you to write the book?
So, many of the people who are clinicians know that intergenerational transmission of trauma is not a new idea. Yesterday there was a Holocaust Remembrance Day, and I'm connected to it because, in fact, the idea that emotions can be passed from generation to generation, and especially traumatic events, the research started after the Holocaust in the 50s. And many of the clinicians that did that research were Holocaust survivors, and their patients were Holocaust survivors or second generation of Holocaust survivors. And if you read some of those psychoanalytic articles, it's what I like to call in the book research is me search. It was their me search, meaning that people that grew up in an environment that they felt like, oh, something was different. We are different from other people. And what is going on? Why am I carrying something? That intuitively they felt like that's happening. And then as the me search is, you feel something and then you go research it to ask yourself, like, what is happening with me and my family? So I think that that was a psychoanalytic idea that I almost grew up with and intuitively spoke to me. And then I opened it to the idea of emotional inheritance, which is not only trauma and traumatic experiences. It's also about, inheritance, like in real material inheritance. We get a lot of things that are inherited and passed down to us. Some of them are good, and some of them are a burden that we don't know what to do with. And I mean, that metaphor worked for me, especially when I worked with patients and realized that when I sit with a patient, I usually sit with more than one generation. I sit with their parents and with their grandparents that exist in their psyche.
Wow. I'm thinking of how many patients actually struggle. They don't really want to go into like their history so much, something about that makes them
Right.
uncomfortable. Maybe they don't want to be judgy. So as you're saying that, like,
Right.
yeah, that really hits home.
Yeah, and you're thinking to yourself, your mother is here with us, your father is here with us, your siblings, by the way. I mean, there are a lot of siblings in the book, right? The siblings are part of our psyche, and their great grandparents, their grandparents. It's a really interesting thing because when I was writing a workbook that is related to the book, what I realized is that people never come to therapy to talk about their grandparents. But then when you ask them about the grandparents and when you tell the grandparents stories, it becomes very clear that those grandparents are part of our unconscious and how we respond to their histories in different ways.
Wow, that is, yeah, that's so true, right? Nobody comes to discuss their grandparents, but
Right.
yeah, that's such a good point. So even before we start, I have a question, as far as like, what about if somebody is here on the live or they're watching the recording after and they're thinking about, okay, so now if I have some idea of what my emotional inheritance might be, like, what should I do with it? They don't know what to do with that information. Like, what would you say to them?
That's a really good question because it's one of those things that you don't just get and apply it, right? This is a process that is a process of awareness. It's because, a lot of people who read the book wrote to me and said, I had an aha moment, right? And for me, I asked myself, what does it really mean to have an aha moment? And I realized that what people don't do when it comes to emotional inheritance is make connections, connections between past and present. And of course, it's always related to the future too. So I feel that part of what we do with it, the first step is that aha moment, right? And we can talk about how do you even get there. But the moment when you say, oh, I give an example in the workbook, I became a midwife because I had a grandmother who died during childbirth when she gave birth to my mother or my father. And I never put that together, right? That's an example of somebody that I spoke to that after they read the book, they suddenly, for the first time, made the link between two things that were not a secret, right? She knew that, but she never put them together. She never realized that her career choice was somehow related to her traumatic family history. So the first step is really making connections. And then I think the next step is always making choices, being able to make decisions and choose and conscious decisions about who you want to be, about your relationships, but also about things you want to have or don't want to have. And right, the things that you want to have in your life and how you want to have them.
Yeah, that was very powerful, especially that part where you said, like, it's not a secret. It's just about making the links. It's something
Right,
that you might already know. You don't have to think like, I mean, there might also be things you don't know, but
right.
honestly, it could be something that's
Yeah.
surface, like, it's part of your history. It's a story that's told. And yeah, that really
That's so
resonates.
fascinating, right? Because we always, and in the book, I talk a lot about family secrets. I talk a lot about secrets and I lecture a lot about family secrets and how to think about family secrets.
Yeah.
But when we talk about emotional inheritance, it's important to say that we're not actually always talking about secrets. A lot of the history of our parents and grandparents are known to us. I mean, in the book, I talk about my own family history, and I talk about my uncle, whom I've never met, who died when my mother was a young girl. And that family trauma, that probably was the biggest trauma in my mother's life, was never a secret. We knew about it, but we somehow did not connect it to anything else in our lives. And in the book, if you remember, I have a chapter that is titled "Dead Brother, Dead Sister," about a patient who comes to therapy and tells me that her her brother died when she was young. And I listen to her story and I write in that chapter, I think to myself, it's the most sad story I ever heard in my life. I've never heard a story like that. And only in retrospect, as I was thinking about it, I thought, I actually did hear a story like that. It's my mother's story. So we're dealing here with things the pieces of the puzzle that are, I see somebody writes here that like missing pieces of the puzzle. Some of it are missing
Exactly.
and some of it is right in front of us. And
Yeah.
they're not missing. They're
Yes.
there. But our mind does not allow them to
Yeah.
allow us to see them.
That's so true. Yeah. And just like getting personal for a minute, I had a couple of those aha moments this week for the first time where I was in a group and all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, like someone said something. And this is where I think groups could be very helpful. You like bounce
Uh-huh.
off of people. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I made these like two separate like connections that just all of a sudden like puzzle pieces, like more puzzle pieces, things fell into place. It is
Right,
fascinating.
because it's all about connections. I
Yeah.
think that is what, in psychoanalysis, we really have a concept that's called attacks on linking. Attacks on linking means that we defend ourselves from knowing. We attack the link. We attack connections between things so we don't have to face them. Right. So, and it's definitely true when it comes to trauma and to family trauma and to
Yes.
emotional inheritance, because there is almost like an unconscious, secret agreement between the generations that one generation is not going to burden the other. And it's bi-directional, right? We're not going to burden our parents and they're not going to burden us. We're not going to tell the children are not going to step on their parents' pain. We walk around it, right? I'm not going to ask my mother about her brother, and they're not going to uh, burden us, so to speak. And there are so many stories in emotional inheritance about parents who had very good intentions and really tried not to burden their children. And in fact, they created what we call the ghost, something that exists there, but nobody knows what it is because it's a secret. So they don't know. And I mean, if you remember the Noah story in emotional inheritance, is a story of a man who feels he knows the secret. And not going into the details now, but he knows the family secrets. He comes to therapy because of the family secrets. But his presenting problem is that he thinks he's crazy. It's like, I feel that I have a dead brother, right? And that is like, I'm exposing
So extreme. Yeah. Yeah.
right? And then at the end, you're
It's
like,
mind
oh,
blowing.
you actually did have a dead brother. It was
Yes.
just a family secret and nobody ever told you. So these secrets live in our unconscious.
Yeah. That's true. And I like what Aileen just wrote. I think there is something to do with timing too. What can our minds hold or not yet? Timing is perfect and not linear. Yeah,
Right.
that's so good.
That is a perfect way to say it, actually, because
Yeah.
time and timing is the most important thing in everything, right? It's the most important thing in when we are, our mind, and we are ready to know something. And of course, people go towards it when they're ready.
Yeah.
And it's also the right question about when and how to tell the next generation material that could be troubling or secrets, right? Where and how to
Yeah.
talk about sensitive material and time and timing, the age of the children, right? The time in our life, like a lot of questions around time. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And I think also as an adult to be able to mentally take that in, like your
Mhm.
own readiness, your own
Yes.
feeling of, okay, I'm ready to face those links.
To go towards it, it's almost counterintuitive to go towards pain. It's like we learned that wherever there is pain, we back off, and
Right.
that's a
Yeah.
survival, right, instinct. And I think in some ways, and especially in therapy, we look at the resistance to actually go towards pain and touch things that are painful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. So I did bookmark using some fancy bookmarks here, but I did bookmark a couple of different pages just to bring up some interesting topics. I mean, I can't even say that stood out to me because I would just be like reading page by page with you. But just this line, it was the story about Leonardo, and the line that you wrote was, "It is impossible to grieve an unrecognized loss, yet without the process of mourning, one's life is imprisoned by death." That was amazing. And I would love if you want to like expand on that or share a little bit more.
That goes back to a very basic concept that is originally a Freudian concept of mourning and melancholia. And Freud was talking about the difference between mourning and melancholia, that in contemporary thinking, we break that binary. We really believe that we all are melancholic and, mourning. But thinking about how one can mourn. And in order to mourn, we have to acknowledge losses. It's almost like we need to let ourselves mourn, as opposed to being stuck in a melancholic state where we don't want to recognize that there is a loss, or in the Leonardo story is that there is a family secret that doesn't allow you to know anything about the family loss and family losses, a specific loss in that case. And then there is no ability as a family even to mourn. I mean, think about it even in a practical way. There is something so important, and in Jewish tradition, to think about sitting Shiva and mourning together as a community and as a collective. And we're thinking about what doesn't allow one to mourn and what does it do. And in the book, I really talk about you're stuck in a place where you are trapped and a part of you will become dead. You're trapped in that way.
Yeah. And by death, do you mean like the melancholia, does that refer only to actual physical death, or or grief, or does it also refer to like, grief of, let's say, someone who's experiencing like
Yeah.
estrangement with a parent, or any kind of
Every
grief?
kind of death, every kind
Every
of
kind.
loss, right? Losses are not just in, physical losses. They're emotional losses. They are every kind of loss, relationship losses. It could be anything, any loss that is not acknowledged or we are unable to mourn. Could part of what we do when we lose something, it could be divorce, right? The ability to really accept the reality and mourn our losses is a fundamental experience and function that when we do, if we don't do that, we are dead. And again, dead, I mean not physically dead. It means that we are stuck in emotional deadness. And the thing that will allow us to move and integrate life and death is to be able to mourn and to mourn our losses.
Yeah. And that could be really scary for people
Yeah.
too. Just reading some comments, we don't acknowledge death much anymore. It's all put in hospitals or hospice or funeral homes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so much death.
Exactly. We're so afraid. And somebody here I saw wrote there were so many deaths in 2020, right? Since COVID. And I think
Yeah.
that a lot of that, which was really interesting, I want to share with you a thought about that, because one interesting thing that happened to me in my practice during COVID is that I noticed that people who had intergenerational trauma, they were second generation of people who suffered um, extreme tragedies in their parents and grandparents suffered extreme tragedies. They were able to deal with the stress situation in a much better way, and it's almost counterintuitive, because our research around intergenerational transmission of trauma is usually indicates that when you're a second generation, and Dory Lau is the person that wrote about that a lot, second generation have symptoms that are sometimes more severe than the first generation. Right. And I think some of it is because we are mental health clinicians. We're there to help people with the negative part of their emotional inheritance, with the symptoms of anxiety and PTSD that pass down from generation to generation. And there is a lot of research, and we could talk about how that happens. But I think that one of the things we don't talk about enough is resilience and hope. And the fact that when you have somebody in the previous generation who survived something horrific, it is part of your, so to speak, DNA. You actually you're inspired by that because your own existence, our own existence, is a proof that life can go on, right? That survival is
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah. And then this, I like this comment too. Alien is really, coming in strong with the comments. Sometimes we don't even have permission in the family to mourn.
Right.
And that, I think, just to follow up on what you just said, like when there's not permission in the family and it's
Right.
just kept quiet, shoved under the rug,
Hmm.
it's not
And
up for
many
discussion.
times that though this is the case, right? Because many
Yes.
times it what especially the parents communicate with children is that we should be okay,
Yeah.
right? We should not mourn, it should not hurt. And then the kids feel like something is wrong with them because no, things are
Because they're
not
sad.
okay.
Yep.
Yeah, it's something hurts and it's not okay. And I
Yeah.
don't feel that I'm okay. So what's wrong with me?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot there.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, that's related to what we're saying about this little contract between parents and children, because while of course not every parent is a good enough parent and wants the best for their children, we are talking here about something that I would like to normalize. I want to think about good parents who try to help their children, who wants the best for their children, and therefore they hide things from the children or don't allow mourning because they don't want pain, or don't want to tell the children anything that might trouble the children. And
Yeah.
so they come from a really good place and leave the child really alone and feeling that something is wrong with them.
Yeah, and I've seen this even in families with adult children, if a sibling passes away at an older age, and even the adult children don't really talk about it. So definitely with younger ones for sure,
Right.
and really at all ages. And it's too painful. Everyone thinks it's too painful, so we won't talk about it. What they're not realizing is you're perpetuating the pain, you're maybe even growing the pain, and you're going to be transmitting it to
Yeah.
future generations.
It's absolutely true. One of the things that made me really happy about the way Emotional Inheritance, the book, was accepted, is that some people wrote to me that they had family book clubs and read
Mm,
the book as a family. And that
wow.
opened a whole conversation about the family history and the family trauma and secrets in the family. And that honestly made me so happy. I thought like, oh, great, if I could help some families to
Yeah.
initiate deep conversations about feelings, about trauma, right? Exactly what you were saying about things that many families try to avoid because they want to protect each other.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And there's another line that I liked. It's on page 118. Most didn't know how to make sense of the strange synchronicity between those family secrets and the way their minds and bodies responded to information they didn't consciously know.
Mhm.
Again, I guess just this really ties into everything we're saying, right? Like just not understanding how the family secrets
Yeah.
tie in to what they're experiencing physically.
Yes, yes. Physically and emotionally, and things they choose or cannot choose, and
Mhm.
paths they choose, because it lives in our unconscious, even if it's a secret.
Yeah, and so that brings me to the story of John. This is on page 130. The story
Hmm.
of John, whose sister had passed
Uh-huh.
away, and he was a baby. And so a little bit about childhood attachment. So I'm just going to read a little bit, and we can talk about it. Childhood attachments shape the therapeutic relationship in the same way that they form other relationships outside therapy. Those who expect to be loved often make sure others love them, while those who expect to be neglected might evoke neglect, which is so interesting to reflect on. And our goals as therapists is to examine those patterns, to ask ourselves in what ways our patients relive their early relationships with us, to question who we become to them, and to process those old attachments while creating new, different ones. And then it does a little bit about you working with John. John isn't angry with his mother simply because even after she died, he still longs for her. The
Yeah.
more neglectful she was, the more his need and longing for her increased. What do
Right.
you think?
Almost counterintuitive, right? Because you think to yourself, oh, the neglectful parent is a parent I'm angry at, is a parent that I am, right? I dismiss. If they die, I don't care. But it's usually the opposite, right? The more neglectful, and I think, in one of my Instagram posts at some point, I wrote something about the fact that the absent parent is also often absent in therapy, and that people often start therapy talking about the present parent
Mm-hmm.
or the parent who was more safe, paradoxically, and people were so surprised by that. And I don't know if you saw that or if you had feelings about
Yeah.
that, because even as therapists we don't always notice
Mm-hmm.
how the absent parent is absent. So
Yeah.
going back to John's case, there is a feeling that he's longing, and the longing of a little boy remains in the grown-up, right? The longing for the mother his mother was severely traumatized by the death of his sister, and she was just checked out, so she was there. And at the end of the day, he was the child who sat next to her in the hospice and fed her and took care of her, because he was the child that was really, really, really longing for the connection with the mother and the acceptance and the wish to be welcomed into the world. Because in that chapter, I talk about unwelcomed babies and the baby that the parents really didn't want, and he really, really wanted to be wanted.
Yeah. And that's like a lifelong pain, a lifelong desire to be connected.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And somebody wrote, this happened to me with my father. I am now an older adult. Yeah. So you could
Yeah.
probably confirm that that never ends ever, however old you get.
It's really true. And you know what? It's true also. Thank you for that comment. That many times the fathers are the absent, because in divorces, the children often stay with the mother. And then one parent, and I see somebody else says that's me, the father is gone, and the father becomes the good parent, or the parent you long for, or the parent that you think, look, if he just comes back, it's going to be so much fun. He's the fun person. He's right. He's the one that you long for and hope to connect with.
Yeah.
The parent, right? The parent that raises you is the most boring one. It's the one that does the homework and cooks the food that you don't always like.
They're so dependable. They're so predictable.
Yeah.
They don't bring
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also that parent, usually it's the mothers, but not always, but that parent is usually also the parent that is safe, and it's safe enough to be angry with.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. So yeah, this person wrote, my father is now trying to reconnect. He's 84 years old, and reconnection is possible. That's something else you wrote in the book about, aligning and showing up and being able to be attuned at least 70% of the time, but it's hard when a parent is that old, and as the person becomes an adult, there's a lot of resentment that gets carried too.
Yeah, but repair is possible, and that's what you're saying. And I think that research of Ed Tronick is one of the most comforting research for parents, because what it says really is that a good parent, or a good enough parent, as we call it, is tuned in to the child only 30% of the time, right? That's very little. The rest of the time, they repair,
Yeah. So it's
The rest of
normal
the
for
time.
parents to make mistakes.
Yeah, we can make mistakes. The issue is not making mistakes. The issue is the ability to actually repair. And repair doesn't mean necessarily like a big act of repair. It means it could be in affect, right? It means to get closer. It means to ask how things are. It means to connect, really, to reconnect,
Yeah.
to be tuned in.
That's it. And going back to what we said before, that's what everyone wants. Like everybody wants,
Yeah.
Yeah. As a divorced mom to a 4-year-old, this helps me understand her better. Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
Just being able to be emotionally attuned.
Yeah, and it helps you understand your child, because you understand that when the child is in pain, they will express their pain or their anger or their frustration at the parent who is safe and present. And it's not fair. It's not fair, but it's also a privilege, right?
Because that bond is there. So like you could take comfort in that.
Yeah, it's the bond. Yeah, and if you tuned into that child, that is a bond forever.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're going to wrap up. I have one question that came in off of Instagram, but there is one more here. I wonder do you want to read it? And
do you see it?
I see it. Okay. Because I try to explain to him, as somebody whose 84-year-old father, I guess, is looking to reconcile. I try to explain to him that I'm still angry, but he wants me to forget the past. What book could help me?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
But maybe we can think about it for a little bit and send her a book, because it's a really great, moment that you could actually think of connecting with your 84-year-old father and repair. And in somewhere else I talk about the fact that forgiveness and repair are two different things. You can forgive someone, but you don't have to repair things with them. but and the ability to repair requires two people. I don't think that you can actually forget the past. Pasts are never forgotten. There are no new beginnings. That doesn't exist, But it does is that you go back to the past and you really see each other and you see each other's pain.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, even as a grown-up child, to understand that father and who he was and why he chose to to make the choices he made.
Yeah, and this might be rough to hear because it's almost like you're saying you need to tap into the empathy piece a little bit. Like you have to see things from each other. Not to whitewash your anger or to take it away, but
Yeah.
to recognize. Yeah.
Right. And as a parent, I think that there's still a hierarchy, between parents and children. I'm a mother of, adult children. Adult children are still your children, right? You're still the parent.
Yeah.
So as a parent, and I'm not sure that parent could do that, and maybe we will forgive them or maybe not. But as a parent, is what we want to do is to be able to still be a parent, to still be the person that says, tell me more about what you feel, tell me more about what hurt you, and apologize and change.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to read this question that came in via email. Somebody who saw the book club ad. She wanted to know about how people who are carrying emotional inheritance are perhaps grappling with it in a time or a climate that makes what they're grappling with not feel so much like an inheritance, but like a legacy. Meaning it's not just something that they're carrying, but it's something that's currently ongoing for them in their present. And they imagine it might even impact them realistically in their future. So she was curious how that plays into our emotional and psychological well-being, if it's something that we carry from the past and is still something ongoing.
Yeah. Listen, this is a really complicated question, and I'll tell you why. Because you're talking here, and that is true for many, I could give many examples of that, including political, personal, things that happen in the past and they're still happening in the present. And if we move it into a very personal thing, it is, think about abusive parents. I mean, I saw that one of the people said, the same woman said that her father is very selfish. Sometimes there is the father of your childhood and the father of your adulthood. And sometimes they didn't change. They're the same person, right? So the abuse of the past is still the abuse of the present, right? And so I think that in situations where past and present intermingle, and I think that's your question, right? I mean, I don't always differentiate between emotional inheritance and legacy. To me, they're a little bit, there is an overlap there, but I do understand that the question is like, what happens if this is still what's happening, right? We used to have that, and it's not just the trauma of the past.
Right.
That's
It's a
your
present
grandmother
day
was,
burden.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's still ongoing, right? So I think some of what we have to do is to try to also find the differences, because otherwise it sits on each other in a way that we cannot differentiate past and present. We want to be able to differentiate them so we can work with them both as related, but also as separated.
Okay. Can you give an example of like how would somebody differentiate? What would they do?
I think that what you do is, for example, if something happens that happened in the past to someone else, right? It depends on what you're talking about. But if you're talking about something that happened to someone else in the past, you look at the circumstances of that person. You look at it and you say, okay, that happened to them 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and this was the environment, this was the circumstances. There are things that are similar. There are things that happen that overlap. Here is something that happened to me now. In what way? And this would be the question I would ask. In every level of thinking about that. In what way it is exactly the same, and in what way it's different. In what way what happened to my grandmother is identical to what happened to me. Who am I, right? In what way I am different from her, right? My circumstances and where I live and what I do is different. And in what way it's exactly identical. And that's where you start separating it and understanding what belongs to where. Because otherwise you're flooded with, in Leonardo's case, he says, I'm cursed. Why does he think he's cursed? Because he cannot differentiate between his grandfather's faith and his own. It's like he needs to repair something that belongs to the past. And what we want is to be able to, at least the beginning of the work is of also differentiating.
Okay. And that helps them create like safety. Like, what does that help them?
I think that what it helps is with having agency, because sometimes when you tell another person's story, or when you attach your story too much to the stories of the past, it feels like you have no agency. And you become, for example, in some situations, when somebody in the past was just a victim, and you are not just a victim. But you have the identity of a victim if you identify too much with what happened in the past. So you want to be, even if you are a victim, to not be only a victim, to really open a space to say, yes, I'm a victim in this situation, but here is a way in which it's a little different from what happened. My victimhood is a little different, or maybe I'm not only a victim. Maybe in this situation, I have more power, I have more agency, I could do something different, and I think that is important in order to not have the two experiences melt into each other. And you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, it's a lot of good food for thought. Okay, so I know we had planned to end around now. Do you have a couple minutes that I can read some of the comments, or do you want us to?
You go.
Okay,
Do you have more
let's.
comments?
I have a couple more minutes. Okay, is there always a parent that feels safer? Sometimes I see that in traumatic cases that it can be the less dangerous parent or the less unpredictable more than the safe one. How you treat that in session, I guess. I'm not sure what the question is. Is there
I
always?
think I can answer the first part,
Yeah.
because I think that there's always the fantasy that there is a safe parent. You know what I mean? As children, I mean. As grown-ups, you really can, in therapy, you can understand, actually, I didn't have any safe parent. But as a child, if you don't believe that at least one of your parents is a little bit safe, you live in an environment that is too dangerous for you. So some children assign safety to one of the parents. They say, oh, this is the safe parent. When they grow up, and when I see them in my practice as they grow up, they might challenge it. They might actually realize that it was the other way around. Right? That the parent who was yelling was actually less dangerous than the parent who was not yelling, right? Or one was instigating something, or there is, so whatever you do as a child, you have to reflect on as a grown-up and ask yourself, did I have a safe parent? Who was the safe parent? And sometimes it's what you think it was, and sometimes it isn't.
Yeah, that's so true. And sometimes it's what you think it was, but with a little modification, meaning maybe that parent was still the more dangerous parent, but maybe the one that you thought was the
Right.
safe parent wasn't
Right.
as safe as you really
Yeah.
think, which is so interesting to observe how that impacts you. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So this
Thank
has
you
been,
so much. I am so happy to be here today.
yeah, thank you for this great conversation. And everybody who could definitely, if you haven't read it yet, go read it. It's fantastic.
Thank you so much,
All
Robin.
right. Bye-bye.
Bye.